Since Star Trek was cancelled in 1969, fans had eagerly awaited to see their favourite ship and crew return. But after 10 years of waiting, Star Trek the Motion Picture wasn't the triumphant return all had been waiting for. The franchise was in a tough spot, and it fell to one of the most unlikely of teams to ensure we Trekkies would keep getting more Star Trek for decades to come. Star Trek the Motion Picture was met with a mixed reaction from both critics and audiences, and its box office didn't match the blockbuster contemporaries Paramount Pictures was hoping for. However, the studio executives acknowledged there was still an audience out there for a Star Trek movie, and so decided to move forward with the next installment, hoping this time they'd get it right. Gene Roddenberry, the man who had created the original idea for Star Trek in the first place, offered his own script for a sequel. In Roddenberry's script, the Klingons travelled back in time using the Guardian of Forever, seen previously in the excellent City on the Edge of Forever, and stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy, corrupting the timeline. Thus, it would be up to the Enterprise crew to set things right. Paramount flatly rejected this idea. In fact, Paramount pinned much of the blame for the motion picture's lukewarm reception on Roddenberry himself. He was a famously slow, plodding writer, even during the original series. This was one of the reasons the motion picture began shooting without a completed script. There was also an antagonistic relationship between Roddenberry and writer Harold Livingston, as Roddenberry often took credit for work Livingston had actually done. To stop these same problems happening with the next Star Trek movie, Paramount removed Roddenberry from the project and gave him the title of creative consultant. This was a purely ceremonial position. This meant the team who would come in to craft the next Star Trek film would have to run their ideas by Roddenberry. However, they were under no obligation to adhere to any of his recommendations. To produce the film, Paramount looked to Harve Bennett, a recent addition to Paramount Television at the time. He had previously worked at Universal with Battlestar Galactica creator Glenn A. Larson on The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman. For Paramount Television, he had produced the television movie A Woman Called Golda, which starred Ingrid Bergman in her final role. The TV movie went on to be nominated for 7 Emmy Awards, winning 3, and won a posthumous Golden Globe for Bergman herself. Leonard Nimoy also starred in the film, and was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. Nimoy was thrilled when he discovered Paramount was tapping Bennett for the next Star Trek film. Bennett had a reputation as a hard worker who was often able to get a lot done with a tight budget and strict schedule. He was called into a meeting at Paramount with executives which included Jeffrey Katzenberg, Michael Eisner, and Charles Bluhdorn from Paramount's parent company Gulf Western. According to Bennett, he was asked by Eisner, "Do you think you can make a better movie than the motion picture?" Bennett confessed that he found the first Star Trek movie quite boring. Bennett answered yes to the question. Charles Bluhdorn then asked, "Can you make it for less than $45 million? Bennett replied, "Where I come from, I can make 5 movies for that." Bennett was soon given the job. Having landed the project, Bennett had a tough task ahead of him, as he had, in fact, never seen a single episode of Star Trek. A problem which he believed plagued the motion picture was a lack of a good central antagonist. So he began combing through old episodes of the series to see what he could find. Eventually, he found exactly what he was looking for with Space Seed. Space Seed was an episode from the original series I chose not to talk about in detail during part 1 of this series because I knew I would be talking about it more for this video. Space Seed sees the Enterprise come across the SS Botany Bay, a centuries-old ship from a devastating war in Earth's past. Aboard the ship are some 72 living men and women, genetically engineered superhumans who attempted to conquer the Earth. After their leader, Khan Noonien Singh, is revived, he quickly plots a takeover of the ship to re-embark on his quest for dominance. It's easy to see why Bennett thought he'd found the cornerstone of the next Star Trek movie. Ricardo Montalban is simply phenomenal as Khan. He oozes quiet confidence and menace, not to mention is truly believable as a ruthless conqueror. Yet at the same time, The character is the perfect foil for Kirk. Khan ultimately cares deeply for his comrades in the same way Kirk does for his own crew, and just as Kirk often bucks authority or violates regulations if it means helping his friends, Khan is willing to do anything for his people. While Star Trek the original series is certainly full of great villains, Khan's depth of character and Montalban's Shakespearean screen presence dominate the episode. We truly get the sense that not only has Kirk met his match, but the entire Enterprise crew have. It's a good episode elevated to greatness by this character and this performance. After his appearance on Star Trek, Montalban continued to work tirelessly on both stage and screen. By the 80s, however, he was somewhat of a household name for his role as Mr. Rourke on Fantasy Island. This show was enormously successful, running for 7 seasons and over 150 episodes. When Bennett approached Montalban about reprising the role of Khan, the producer made sure to work around his schedule for Fantasy Island. However, it took some time for the actor to settle back into his Star Trek role.
When they offered me the part, it isn't that I think that there is a part that is too small for me. No, but there was in a way, because after 6 years of Fantasy Island, which was a very successful series, I wanted to be on the screen with a more important role, When I read it, I thought something. I thought, well, when I am not on the screen, they're talking about me. So it seemed, and besides, it's an interesting role. I think I can do something with it. However, I said, okay, I'll do it. I began getting acquainted with the character, which I had to bring from way back. And I began to articulate as I memorized the dialogue. And to my terrible despair, I sounded to me like Mr. Rourke of Fantasy Island. Say the audiences are going to laugh me off the screen. They're going to believe that I am Khan, the Superman. I sound like Rourke. What is it? So I called Harvey Bennett. Harvey, could you send me a print of the original Space Seed? And he sent me it, And I played it, and I played it again about 3 times. About the 3rd time, I began to remember what I thought then as an actor, what I was trying to accomplish, or what I did accomplish, whatever. And all of a sudden, it came to me. So what I have to do now is bring that character, and then make it passionate, because he's blaming Kirk for the death of his wife, whom he loved passionately. And so he was revenge. And so I have to play this character fully. I'm not going to play it safe, play safe. No, I'm going to play it full of passion. Vengeance, not for himself, but for the memory of his wife, whom he adored. And all of a sudden I began to read it, and I was convinced by that time that Mr. Rourke had disappeared, and that indeed I had become Khan.
Having found his chief villain, Bennett hired Robert Sallin as another producer and Michael Meyer as art director while he worked on the story. His first treatment was titled War of the Generations. This story saw Kirk investigating rebellion on a distant world, only to find his own son leading it and Khan pulling the strings. Bennett then hired avid Star Trek fan and writer Jack B. Sowards to turn his treatment into a script. Sowards would later go on to write the episode Where Silence Has Lease for Star Trek The Next Generation. His chief contribution to Star Trek II was creating the Kobayashi Maru test, a Starfleet Academy exercise designed to teach cadets about a no-win scenario, which Kirk cheated at to pass in his younger years. Sowards' script, titled The Omega Syndrome, featured the theft of a powerful destructive weapon called the Omega System. However, Bennett found the plot of a superweapon too cliched. It was Michael Meyer who suggested changing it to a terraforming device. Allegedly, Bennett gave Meyer a hug after this suggestion and declared that he had saved Star Trek. Sowards then renamed the device to the Genesis device. An early component of the story which all of the creative team were sure of was the decision to kill off Spock. The exact reasoning for this is something I will tackle in detail during part 4 of this retrospective series. Originally, this death was to happen early in the film. Bennett compared it to Janet Leigh being shockingly killed off in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. However, when a leaked version of this script was seen by many Star Trek fans, they were horrified. The creative team were soon inundated with furious fan mail from Trekkies, demanding they reverse their decision. Some fans even took out paid advertisements in popular magazines to voice their anger. Some fans even expressed the sentiment, "If Spock dies, you die." Most absurd of all, Leonard Nimoy himself received death threats. I just want to take a quick aside here to say this is quite possibly the dumbest thing any Star Trek fan has ever done. This reaction prompted Sowards to move Spock's death to later in the story. As the script continued to develop, writer Samuel A. Peebles, who had previously written the teleplay for the original series Where No Man Has Gone Before, and had worked on Star Trek the Animated Series, was allowed to pitch his own ideas. Peebles' script replaced Khan with two powerful alien villains called Sojin and Moray. However, this idea was deemed too typical of an older Star Trek episode. Despite some other good ideas being brought forward, the script simply wasn't coming together in a way which was liked by all of the team. As deadlines loomed, a Paramount executive named Karen Moore suggested Bennett reach out to a then 36-year-old Nicholas Meyer. Meyer had received some acclaim for his Sherlock Holmes pastiche novel, The 7% Solution, which was later adapted into a film. Since then, he had contributed to television movies such as Judge Dee and the Monastery Murders, as well as The Night That Panicked America. But he made his directorial debut in 1979 with Time After Time. If you haven't seen this hidden gem of a film, then I would highly recommend seeking it out. It was a real delight for me to watch in researching for this video. Time After Time, and if you're wondering, yes, this film did actually inspire that Cyndi Lauper song of the same name, stars David Warner and Malcolm McDowell, both of whom would later join the Star Trek franchise as Jack the Ripper and H.G. Wells, the latter of which has recently built a time machine. When the Ripper's identity is uncovered, he escapes into 1979 San Francisco, where Wells soon follows. It's a wonderfully daft premise, a schlocky, pulpy story elevated by great filmmaking craft, strong writing, and terrific performances from the entire cast. Meyer essentially retrofits a Holmes versus Moriarty battle of wits between frenemies onto the dynamic between Wells and the Ripper, identified in the film as Dr. John Leslie Stevenson. Warner is effortlessly cool and sinister, whereas McDowell, in a rare turn as the film's hero, is wonderfully sincere and absurdly polite. There's a great clash of worldviews on display here. Wells, being an earlier stage of his life, is full of optimism, believing the world will naturally trend towards a socialist utopia within his own lifetime, while Stevenson believes humanity is a slave to its baser desires and can never achieve true prosperity. The movie is a true showcase of Meyer's ability to pull from the strengths of disparate genres in order to create a unique and enjoyable story. Here he mixes much of the themes of Wells' own work with an Arthur Conan Doyle murder mystery. Also, this time machine is simply adorable looking. If you're interested in more of Meyer's work, I would also highly recommend the 1983 TV movie The Day After, as well as virtually every interview and commentary you can get your hands on. He's truly a fascinating person and a unique creative voice who I personally count as one of my idols. Like Bennett, Meyer had never seen a single episode of Star Trek, which he later reflected was one of his strengths in approaching the project. He said, "The chief contribution I brought to Star Trek was a healthy disrespect. Star Trek was human allegory in space format. That was both its strength and ultimately its weakness. I tried through irreverence to make them more human and a little less wooden. I didn't insist Captain Kirk go to the bathroom, but did Star Trek have to be so sanctified?" Meyer pulled from many naval literature influences, describing his vision as Hornblower in space, referring to C.S. Forester's Horatio Hornblower novels, of which he was a fan. Purely by coincidence, Roddenberry cited this same novel series as a primary inspiration for his creation of Star Trek. Meyer included much more naval terminology and procedure in the depiction of ship operations. He added in a ship's bell, boatswain's whistle, and asked the uniforms to be more military-like, as he often referred to the uniforms of the original series as looking like pajamas. Meyer also drew from Moby Dick in crafting Khan's character. He and Montalban agreed that every villain sees themselves as the hero of their own story. Montalban particularly liked Khan's quoting of Moby Dick in his pursuit of Kirk. Meyer and Montalban got on famously well during production, with Meyer often proclaiming Montalban as being wasted by most of Hollywood, and I have to say I agree.
Montalban is a great actor, was a great actor. Wasted, like most actors. And he didn't know me. He was very courteous man, very gentleman, courtly, I think. Came in, letter perfect for these 6 pages, hit every mark, boom, 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 boom. And he was screaming the whole thing at the top of his lungs. It was just like, whoa, and everybody was standing there. And I'm thinking, this is the second movie I've ever directed. This man, if we just typed up his credits, are taller than I am. It's a long list. What is he going to do if I start telling him things? And I really didn't know. So I said, okay, well, now they're going to do their lighting. Let's go back in your trailer and we can, chat a little bit about the character. And I went in there and he's sitting there opaquely waiting. And I said, Laurence Olivier once said that an actor should never show an audience his top. Because once you show your top, they know you got no place else to go. And he looks at me and goes, oh, you're going to direct me. He said, that's really good. I need direction. I don't know what I'm doing up there. And then he started to tell me stories about Mervyn LeRoy and all these other directors they work with who would say to him, Ricardo, make it a good scene.
Gene Roddenberry, however, hated these additions to the script. He saw Meyer's approach to Star Trek as being too militant, not in line with his vision of a peaceful utopian future. The creative team, however, ignored his notes. From then on, Meyer and Roddenberry had a famously antagonistic relationship. When Meyer came on board, he set about crafting a new draft of the screenplay. He made a note of everyone's favourite elements of the previous draft at that point, in an attempt to incorporate them into a strong, streamlined story. To offset fan backlash, Meyer added in an early scene in which Spock appears to die during the Kobayashi Maru training sequence, hoping fans would believe this was the apparent death which they had heard about. After Meyer made these notes, he needed to complete the new draft of the screenplay in only 12 days, so the VFX and production design teams could begin work. Meyer was able to complete the new script on time, uncredited and for no pay, which impressed many of the veteran crew members. And in contrast to Roddenberry's slow delivery of rewrites, Meyer was able to make further adjustments to the script at a rapid pace. With a solid script ready to go, the only other element left to do was to settle on a title. Originally the film was titled The Vengeance of Khan. However, at the time, the third installment of the Star Wars franchise was titled Revenge of the Jedi, and 20th Century Fox requested Paramount change their Star Trek title in order to avoid brand confusion, and Paramount obliged. Eventually, however, the same Star Wars film would change its title to Return of the Jedi. Among the titles considered for the new Star Trek was The Undiscovered Country, which was later used for the sixth Star Trek film. However, the team eventually settled on The Wrath of Khan, and the movie was ready to shoot. True to Bennett's reputation as a man who could get things done cheaply and quickly, every dollar of the film's budget was stretched. Sets, props, models, and even finished shots from the motion picture were reused and cannibalized for The Wrath of Khan. Over 60% of the film's principal photography took place on the same bridge set, which was simply redressed to be the Enterprise, Reliant, or training simulator whenever needed. The Klingon bridge from the motion picture was redressed and reused for both the Enterprise torpedo bay and the Regular One transporter room. The Regular One station itself was the same model station from the motion picture, but flipped upside down and retouched. Meyer and Bennett utilized many camera tricks to eschew the need to build expansive large sets. Instead, they used simple forced perspective for the Enterprise's main engineering and for Starfleet Academy. For the uniforms, costume designer Robert Fletcher settled on a warm red for the Starfleet uniforms, again aligning with Meyer's naval influences. For Khan and his followers, Fletcher envisioned them as making their clothing out of whatever they could find. He designed Khan's costume with an open chest to show off Montalban's physique. There was often a lot of speculation that Montalban wore a fake chest for this movie. However, according to everyone who worked on the film, Montalban was simply a muscular person who enjoyed working out. This enhanced the idea that Khan was the physical superior to Kirk. For the visual effects of the film, rather than Douglas Trumbull, Paramount turned to Industrial Light and Magic, made famous for their work on Star Wars. Paramount didn't want a repeat of the long and costly processes of Star Trek the Motion Picture, so Nicholas Meyer and all relevant department heads spent 6 weeks storyboarding and designing every effect sequence in the film in painstaking detail. Once all of these sequences were locked, the team ILM went to work creating the sequences using miniatures and other techniques. The Enterprise miniature from the motion picture was reused, albeit with slightly dulled colours and slightly altered hull details. Allegedly, the model team teams hated working on the Enterprise for its complex internal wiring, immense weight, and awkward mount points. The USS Reliant, on the other hand, was much easier to work with. Originally, the Reliant was meant to be a Constitution-class ship like the Enterprise. However, while designing the space battles, there was concern that audiences would get confused between the two ships, so designers Joe Jennings and Michael Meyer designed the Miranda-class ship instead. This was the first ever Starfleet vessel to be seen in the Star Trek franchise other than the Constitution class. The models were shot using the tried-and-true motion-control camera system, which was invented by John Dykstra, who had supervised some of the effects for the motion picture. For the Mutara Nebula, the team injected a latex and ammonia mix into a water tank, which was then lit using colored gels and shot with a low-speed camera. A famous effect used in the film was the pioneering use of CGI for a sequence depicting what the Genesis device was capable of. Lucasfilm had been funding an in-house computer graphics group. Impressed by their research into this new technology, effects supervisor Jim Velou asked them to create cinema's first fully computer-generated sequence. This computer graphics group would later branch off from Lucasfilm to become Pixar Animation. Another computer graphics company, Evans and Sutherland, also broke ground with digital effects. They used a system called Digistar, originally created for planetariums, to create computer-generated star fields. These were used for the opening credits and closing shot of the film, and were also mixed with traditional matte work in various shots throughout the movie. For the film's score, Paramount, perhaps in yet another attempt to distance Wrath of Khan from the motion picture, decided not to use any of Jerry Goldsmith's work from the previous film and wanted to hire a new composer. Nicholas Meyer suggested a then 28-year-old James Horner, who once again had never seen a single episode of Star Trek. Horner had come from the Roger Corman Film School, scoring many B-movies such as Battle Beyond the Stars and Humanoids from the Deep. Battle Beyond the Stars also had its effects created by James Cameron, who Horner would later work with 3 times on Aliens, Titanic, and Avatar. But now I'm getting sidetracked. He had come to know Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams, and was technically proficient in the realm of scoring for film. At first, Bennett asked Horner to reproduce the theme from the original series. However, Horner and Meyer both wanted to create something new.
I believe that you had to have 2, maybe maximum 3 themes that an audience could keep track of. And then it was important that 3 themes be your principal themes, and then have maybe a motif or 2 that were very short but narrated other things. And themes tended to be long melodies, and the motifs could be short blasts of things. Khan didn't have a long theme. Khan had a high sort of warlike thing that I did in the high French horns, which was da 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 da, and it's very short, and it's accompanied with this sort of percussion da 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 sort of figure. But it helps you know right away that that's Khan's music, and it's very short and distinctive. And that plays against the theme of the Enterprise, which is a long melodic thing. I wanted it to be really something that was strong and warlike, and to me, the high horns, in terms of color, did that. Not the trumpets, but in terms of sheer power, I think it was 8 French horns did that. It was something that I could play that was a short blast of power. It wasn't really a theme, it was just sort of a motif for Khan. And then I could do that, and then when you cut back to Kirk, you could have Kirk's theme very simply dun 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 bum dun, and it was that motif, and then you could cut away to so that these chases could be very easily theme driven, because there was a lot of battle music, and it was incessant. and I had to find a way to musically say who was what and what was who and who was damaged, who was not damaged. And that helped a great deal knowing how the battle was going. And I think that that is really, really important when you are having long battle sequences. Otherwise, it's just action music.
Fire. Fire.
As opposed to the mad dash to finish the motion picture, Bennett's efficient and cost-effective running of the production meant it finished comfortably on time. On June 4th, 1982, the second Star Trek movie was released. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is often held up as the best movie in the Star Trek franchise, and for good reason. While my own personal preferences in terms of my favourite big screen outing varies over time, The Wrath of Khan is comfortably near the top of my own rankings, as I believe it is with most people. In terms of pacing, character depth and narrative themes, it's a big improvement on Star Trek the Motion Picture. One aspect in which it doesn't live up to its predecessor, however, is in its overall production value. The lower budget for the movie certainly shows on screen. Much of the production was supervised by those from Paramount's television unit rather than feature film veterans. That's not to say the finished movie looks bad, in fact quite the opposite. But there's an epic scope and sweeping spectacle present in the motion picture, which doesn't carry over to The Wrath of Khan. That being said, the revamped production design is certainly a step in the right direction compared to the motion picture's dull palette of greys, light blues and beige. The red uniforms featured in this film onwards are some of my personal favourites, and in general the sets feel much more lively than they did before. The Enterprise feels much more like a ship inhabited by people rather than a cold device. ILM's work on the film is no substitute for the lavish work of Douglas Trumbull, but the miniatures and optical work look brilliant. The ships feel like they have real weight and power to them. Each flyby of the Reliant and the Enterprise is simply gorgeous to watch. Nicholas Meyer's direction is economical but highly effective. Not as flashy as the likes of Spielberg or De Palma, but Meyer showcases a true command of scenic blocking and visual storytelling. Scenes are assembled from simple camera moves, but the construction of the scenes themselves lends the film a great sense of pacing. Plenty of quiet moments to follow our characters and then drawing us in with high-stakes tension, only to blow us into the back of our seats with explosive action. There's a clear difference between a director who shoots using coverage for them to find the story in the edit, and a director who knows exactly how to tell their story before they ever set foot on set. Meyer is clearly the latter. While Jerry Goldsmith's score for Star Trek the Motion Picture is one of my favourite film scores of all time, and his Star Trek theme is still what I think of as the Star Trek theme, James Horner's work on Star Trek II is simply wonderful. His work totally captures the swashbuckling hornblower in space feeling Meyer was going for. His new theme for the film is majestic and memorable. His mix of motifs and themes for the battle sequences packs in a lot of emotion to already spectacular sequences. What's especially strong, however, are his contributions to the emotional core of the film. Meyer adds in this very ethereal yet heartwarming theme representing Kirk and Spock's friendship. It's subtle, but it's something which plays throughout the entire film, building until it reaches Spock's ultimate demise, where Horner truly uses the music to break your heart. James Horner is one of my personal favourite composers in general, and I love his score for The Wrath of Khan. The high strings and blasting horns are trademarks of his, which he used throughout his career and are established first with Star Trek. Just like Goldsmith's motion picture soundtrack, Horner's Wrath of Khan is an absolute masterpiece which any avid music fan should own. What truly makes The Wrath of Khan shine is the excellent script, which presents us with real human relationships and personal themes which many felt was missing from the motion picture. The dialogue between Kirk, Spock and Bones is witty and fun, quite possibly the best iteration of this dynamic in the entire franchise. Ricardo Montalban is a truly exceptional villain, easily topping his previous performance in Space Seed. The Captain Ahab drive for revenge and wonderfully flowery dialogue cement Khan's status as Kirk's ultimate arch-nemesis. But while Montalban often steals the scene, This is also one of Shatner's best performances as Kirk, if not the best. His signature cadence is still there, of course, but Meyer's ability in utilising the strengths of his actors results in a nuanced and heartfelt portrayal of the character. Later Star Trek stories involving Kirk, particularly the likes of the later Star Trek V, often feel like painful attempts at returning Kirk to his days of fisticuffs and womanizing. The Wrath of Khan, however, wisely chooses to move the character forward into new territory. Kirk's refusal to accept change in his life, always clinging onto the glory days, perfectly comes back to bite him when a relic of those glory days reappears to threaten his life, and he is unexpectedly confronted by his estranged adult son. All of it builds until the moment Spock chooses to sacrifice himself in order to save the ship. It's surprising when looking back on the film, Spock isn't much of a major player for most of the story. While there are plenty of great moments between the two friends, Spock doesn't have much bearing on the overall story until this pivotal moment, and perhaps that's what makes it all the more impactful. Meyer's brilliant visual storytelling lets a subtle sense of dread rise in the viewer as we see Spock make the crucial decision which will ultimately end his life. The moment Kirk looks over to see the empty chair on the bridge, Kirk's expression conveying his realization of what's just happened, and his frantic run down to engineering as we intercut with the birth of a new world, it is absolutely brilliant storytelling craft. Even now, having seen the final goodbye between the two friends many times now, it still makes me choke up a bit.
I have been, and always shall be, your friend. Live long and prosper.
Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is a spectacular swashbuckling adventure filled with some of the best space battles ever committed to film, yet it's also a moving, personal story about letting go of the past, growing old, death, and rebirth. Written, produced, and directed by a creative team who knew next to nothing about Star Trek, they were able to find and distill on screen what makes Star Trek so special to so many. Upon release, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan became an unabashed hit, critically and commercially. Its success was credited with saving the franchise from another potential demise. When it seemed the future was uncertain for Star Trek, this team of outsiders had cracked the code for further adventures on the big screen. The film was nominated for Best Dramatic Presentation at the 1983 Hugo Awards, and won 2 Saturn Awards, Best Actor for William Shatner and Best Director for Nicholas Meyer. Fans who had been disappointed by the motion picture were thrilled with this follow-up installment. Many proclaimed that the spirit of Star Trek had successfully been recaptured. While the film only grossed $97 million worldwide when compared to the $140 million of the motion picture, thanks to its lower production budget and strong home video sales, it was far more profitable than its first big screen outing. Bennett, Meyer and co. had done it. Star Trek was back. A valued franchise for its studio and an adored pop culture icon for fans. Another installment was soon put into development, but where would the series go from here? It seems a few last-minute additions to the shooting schedule would give some fans a tantalizing clue. Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.